Hello. To those of you who've been here before, welcome back. To those who seeing this for the first time, or seeing any of my videos for the first time, welcome. I'll start off real quick, get it out of the way. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a money person, so if you're looking for any kind of advice, shrug off. You'll get none here. Why? Because I'm nobody to you. So, happy Independence Day. For those who have no appreciation for history, happy 4th of July. But for those of us who actually appreciate our history and the great country we live in, amazing country we live in, happy Independence Day. Yep, this is when we celebrate us, the United States of America. We celebrate our departure from the monarchical rule of England to the self-rule of the colonies. And of course, what we've become since then is something amazing. But that's basically what we're celebrating. Now, honestly, these days I think we're getting a bit astray from what those people initially wanted. They didn't break away to have individuals rule as far as a monarchy, though later on as things progressed they did realize they needed a titular figurehead, not unlike a monarch, but basically a toothless tiger to some degree. Somebody who would lead, but could be held in check in numerous various ways. You've got Supreme Court, you've got Congress. Basically, after we developed our taste for independence, we realized, well, we gotta make sure we can control ourselves so we don't find ourselves in a state of anarchy. This is easy to do. I mean, really easy to do. And honestly, they did really good. They created a federation of states. Our first papers were basically a Confederate Union. Oddly enough, South tried that and it didn't work. But at the same time, in its initial, that was appropriate, that was proper, and it progressed from there. There I go with the P's and the thing again. So anyhow, one of the things that bothers me as I learn more about those origins and our history as a nation and its governance is these days we have kind of shrugged a lot of that off in turn for what's called a democracy. No, honestly, we're not living in a democracy. Generally speaking, if we were, we would have more elections because, well, basically, you would want to constantly take the pulse of the masses. Okay? Now, the House of Representatives is a good example of as close to a democracy as we can get. The Senate was never meant to be of the people, voted on by the people. And we're supposed to be voted on by the representatives of the states, and somehow we've gone askew from that. So right off the bat, you can see we weren't set up as a democracy. Okay? Our titular figurehead actually manages the governance. So, as these three branches work together, there are checks and balances, right? So that's not necessarily a democracy, okay? And that's what I want to talk about. That's really what I want to talk about. All right. It's almost maddening how much we're hearing that word democracy. Our democracy, our democracy, our democracy. Yay, our democracy. we hear it's in peril. I'm not sure from what, but we hear it's in peril. So generally speaking, it's not just the word of the day, it is the word. You know what I mean? For our governance, for our nation. We're a democracy. Well, thank God we're actually not. Okay? But the thing is we're becoming a democracy because they're selling it to us. By throwing that word in constantly. And I do mean constantly. Alright? Whether it's from the left or the right, you're constantly hearing the word democracy. Now, in older times, you would hear the word republic often. There's a difference. Okay, now, I have an older dictionary, which gives a more elaborate description of any word, and its origins and its usage and its, variations. And I mean, you go on the internet, you can get the Quick Reader's Digest, one, maybe two examples of, maybe even 3, 4, and 5. But generally speaking, how can I put it? The dictionary these days is basically owned by the people who would sway you. And generally speaking, if you control the language, you control the people. So that's why we're headed to a democracy. Now, democracies have failed, just like socialism. And pretty much even the communism's been nothing but a failure. But nonetheless, look at the dogs. No digging. Okay, we just got the back and forth. You gotta love puppies. Eventually they'll get tired of not being able to see each other. So, a democracy, in the book I have from the 50s, democracy is said to be basically popular rule. Okay? Rule of, by, and for the people. Oddly enough, it's a governance by, of, and for the people. And there's truth in it. Okay, so it's like, wow, we really are a democracy. But wait, our forefathers, and though I'm not going to be able to quote you anything here. I'm not a historian either. Amongst the other things, I'm a painter. Ask me about painting. Matter of fact, don't ask me. I'm not working. I don't want to talk about it. So anyhow, and see, this is funny too, because this is where it's hard to make people understand we're not a democracy, because it seems so much we are. And the pictures painted suggest we are. But the truth is, the underlying describes that we're not. Okay. So, we have elections. And our elections elect leaders. So there's a populist vote, the populist choice, yada, yada, yada. But our forefathers were wise men. And they knew democracy was basically anarchy. Simple explanation. Democracy was anarchy. Now, democratic principles were a good thing. You know what I mean? Where the people have the vote, the people elect people to represent them, but they put in stumbling stones to ever becoming a democracy. The 3 branches is a final democracy. Okay? You have the executive, our president, and the agencies under him. Okay, which one day, or in a soon upcoming video, I'll talk about that. Because, man, conversations I've had about how bureaucracy is just an absolute nightmare and horror. So anyhow, Under that comes Congress. Congress, oddly enough, in their sense of humor, is split into two. A good thing, because basically this weighs different perspectives against each other. Now, when initially set up, the people elected representatives, as we do, and we elected them every 2 years, as we do. This way there was fresh thoughts to the situation in the local areas, okay, in the, not just the states, but the areas of the states, so that a bigger state would have a feel from each end. You know what I mean? Like I'm in Florida now, so Florida is very long. I think from one end to the other is like 600 miles. And the difference in people in 600 miles is pretty amazing. I live in a wooded area. We're what most people would consider conservative. Generally, our philosophies are going to be a bit different than if you live in Miami. Hell, even Tampa. Alright? I'm halfway between Tampa and Jacksonville. And it's cool, I got a hummingbird I'm watching while I'm doing this. So if I seem a little distracted for a minute or two, it's for good reason. So anyhow, I'm in a wooded area. It's still growing. It's mainly a retirement area. So we don't have a lot of more modern trappings. We do have a bus system, but it's basically one of these big party vans. You know what I mean? We've got a cab system. It's a few people running around in used vehicles, toting people here and there. You know, whether you have to do the stupid medallion thing and all that, I do not know. I do not care. I did not ask. But nonetheless, it's not the same. There's differences. I can go out in my backyard and I can pop off my gun, and none of my neighbors are going to say anything. Not because I'm a man with a weapon in my hand, but because it's a pretty commonplace thing for it to happen around here. Now you go into Miami and you jump out in your little, 40-foot backyard and you start popping off a bunch of rounds. There's going to be knocking at your door. Probably blue lights are going to show up. Men with radios and guns on their hip are going to ask you, what do you think you're doing? In my neck of the woods, it's kind of a, okay, so they're shooting a gun. So what? It's a beautiful thing. Okay, and it shows also that in the small region, you have variations of thoughts and opinions. And this is why the forefathers had set up the House of Representatives as they did, instead of just one representative from the state. Based off populace, you get a true feeling for the character of a state through its various representatives. Okay? The Senate was set up basically as a voice for the state itself and the governance of the states. Okay. Federal government isn't really set up to rule the people. It's not their job. Okay. They make laws that contain us in our activities and things and this and that. But generally speaking, they're really only supposed to be in charge of commerce amongst the states. Make sure that the laws that are set as a constitution for the country, i.e. Bill of Rights, and the laws and articles of the Constitution itself, that's their job, is to make sure those things are followed by the states. And in the Constitution, it pretty much spells that out. Okay, and from there, the states are pretty much up to do what they please. Now, the federal court is supposed to basically be the backstop, okay, for the governance and its growth in power and its ability to rule outside those laws and regulations set forth in the Constitution and Bill of Rights. Go. If you're just going to sit here and scratch, go. Hoshi. Go on, watch out. Go. Yes, I know. You and your allergies. Go. Go on, baby. Go on. Go play. Alright, so with that in mind, the Supreme Court has no real rule other than basically an umpire to call ball and strikes. They have no authoritative, no legislative, no power. But at the same time, they carry the power because their rulings dictate both to the legislative and the executive branch what can and cannot be done within the preponderance of the law, the recognized state of things according to what the laws in the Constitution say. Okay, now the Senate has the ability to make laws, and that's basically their job, is to make laws that pertain to the states, that pertain to the rules that we can do. And that makes sense that the people from the state would make the laws that the states must uphold in agreement with the Union. The House is set up as a checks and balances on both the Senate and the executive branch by having monetary control. They control the money, the purse strings, however you want to look at it. Pretty brilliant, setup they got going on. But that's not entirely a democracy, is it? That's a little off from the democracy, because generally speaking, if the individual states have equal voice, that's not equal voice of the number of the populace. A fine example, okay, New York, I think still, in California, I think still, or as of this day, Independence Day, 2023, have the highest population count. Now, if this was a democracy, our country would be governed almost exclusively by two states. Because if we were a democracy, then those states would have a voice in our state where they do not. Now, don't get me wrong, Florida is a good example of, we follow California building code. Why? Well, basically, that has to do with population, not law, legislation, and things of that nature. Okay? As Florida grows, other states will have to live up to our building codes, because our building codes will be for the most populous state. That's if we're on track to maintain what we have as far as growth. And in that, they'll have to do things according to Florida. Now, they didn't vote on that. Well, they're going to have to follow the rules anyhow, because manufacturers will manufacture things according to where they're going to sell it the most. Okay, so the standards will be set to meet the Florida standards all across the nation. And generally speaking, it's not a bad thing. They have pretty high building standards because of the hurricanes. Now, will they withstand an earthquake? Probably not. But considering how much of California standards will be married into Florida standards, some badass homes here freaking survive who knows what. But anyhow, back to the democracy thing. So, generally speaking, that is a form of democracy because, well, it's by the people, of the people. You know what I mean? And it's for the people. But at the same time, it's not federal law. It's not in our Constitution that all states have to do this. Okay. And see, this is a tough thing because you really have to start separating things or else you'll get too deep into it. So let's look at the Republic. Okay. Why are we more Republic than a democracy? Well, first of all, because if you ever get a chance to read or listen on audiobook, which is easy enough to do, the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers, they went back and forth about democracies and republics and federated governance versus unions versus, they really, some smart people going back with some simple questions, simple answers that were just brilliant in their simplicity. Okay? They're common man language. Okay? They're not necessarily, high philosophical arguments. They're pretty much, they make good sense to anybody who listens to them with an open mind. Okay? But generally they had sorted out in those papers and other communications that democracy was anarchy and they needed something different. Well, our forefathers were big fans of history and they went kind of back and forth on what worked and what didn't. You had Greece, you had Rome, and then of course you had monarchical systems, which they were not going to have. That was already pretty much chosen right at the beginning of our formation as a nation. So you really didn't have too many choices. You had communist society and socialist society, which some of our forefathers kind of leaned towards. But they realized, no, because that's not what is the word I'm looking for? Not a monarchy of a bloodline, but a monarchy of who can achieve power. And then once they achieve power, they become a monarchy again. Alright? That's the best way I can kind of marry why they didn't want it. Okay? Socialism, they realize, well, that's governing the people in a way that gives them no choice, because then the government is all powerful, and being married in with businesses becomes that much more powerful, frightening so. Okay, you can see readings and writings about it through history as people have pondered it. But generally speaking, a republic. One where each region has a voice. Not necessarily each person. Okay, and it makes perfect sense because mob rule is reactionary rule and often not to the wisest end. Alright, we saw it when everybody got the ick back 3 years ago January, or 2 years ago January. So when everybody got the ick, you heard, well, this is the new normal. I don't know if you remember hearing that. That's what was pushed in the media. This is the new normal. First of all, who decided? And who's to decide what's normal? Okay. It really was a bad thing to even go down that road with the this is the new normal. But it spoke to democracy. This is the new normal. What the hell did that mean and this and that? But basically, the overall group of people were thrown into a panic. Okay, and a lot of people, you immediately saw people wearing masks and, they were taking the 6 feet distancing thing, and that was just stupid. They're putting plexiglass in front of cashiers and whatnot, which created zones that you would walk into where somebody previously by only a few seconds had been breathing, and if they were sick, now you were breathing their air because of all they had walked through, and just so much mass stupidity. But you saw the example of what democracy is. okay, you saw how the masses leapt into lockstep, and in so did not rationalize truly and completely our situation, rather responded in fear and bad leadership. So a small few decided for the masses and convinced the masses this was the way to go. And we usurped our Constitution. We did. We said, you can't go to church. Right to assembly, freedom of religion, you know what I mean? Freedom of association. Pretty sure in the first article. I am pretty freaking sure. But democracy usurped this. Now in a republic it can't be done. Okay? Because a republic basically lays out this group makes choices, that group makes choices, this person makes choices for this part of the government, and then they go back and forth. And then basically, if anybody has any real issue, it goes to the Supreme Court. I don't know if you ever notice, whenever there's an issue with a presidential thing, it gets fast tracked. A good example is this student loan thing that happened. Right, that didn't take your average 7 to 10 years to work its way through the courts. It gets the higher courts right off the bat, and from there it goes to the highest court. Because that part of the check in our system is meant to respond relatively quickly. At the same time, none of these are instantaneous. Okay? When the president first got up there, yes, President Trump, and said, well, we're going to shut down America for a couple of weeks. What was it, 2 weeks to stop the spread? It wasn't law. It was a suggestion to states by the executive branch that for the safety's sake of the nation, we go ahead and we shut things down and see who's reacting to what and how. Best idea, worst idea, middle of the road on it. We did kind of need a check real quick to go, okay, who's dying, why, when? All right, real quick, we found out it was old people and people of extreme unfitness or extreme lack of fitness, and people who are generally sick. Not necessarily mortally sick, but sicker than what would maybe be considered common. And often those three married together. And if those three married together, well, pretty much we knew your card was punched. And as you stepped away from that, your likelihood of a demise lessened. Okay, so, not necessarily now. Their actions after that were just stupid, idiotic, and led by an extreme minority. An extreme minority. People in the press corps. People who have ideals that we won't necessarily all agree upon. And generally, basically, people who enjoyed the power. Okay, so these small groups of people decided they'd push it further and yada, yada, yada. Now, honestly, as a republic, each state had its right to open or close as they chose, as is a republic. Now, could the government, federal government, had mandated that they were closed? It would have to go through Congress. Now, the executive branch could close down the executive branch, but they're not going to shut down government because they're not going to. If anything, government grew during that. Okay, they added more agencies and blah 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 and studies and spent more money giving the minority more rule. So once again, you have Florida that basically, after a couple of weeks, went, you know what? Let's open back up because it looks like no matter what we do, some group of people are going to go anyhow. And they were right. We opened back up. We went back to normal. People out fishing, people going to work, people doing what they do. You know what I mean? Going to church, getting together in groups, going to concerts, things of that nature. People back on the cruise ships, which that was a fun one to watch as they heckled and haggled. But generally speaking, Florida became one of the freest states. I think South Dakota, that little hottie that they got as a governor, oh my God, what is her name? She's so smoking hot. Kristi Noem. My God. I think possibly the most beautiful woman ever in politics. Boebert, you got the body, baby, but she's a complete package. So anyhow, can you tell I watch politics for politics' sake, huh? So anyhow, Florida opened up wide. A populous state that had a good increase since the 60s of its populace, a regular increase. The increase got larger because many of these states maintained their lockdowns, viciously so. Now at the same time, this goes back to the Republic. That was their rights. It is the right of these states to require certain things of their citizens. Now the no church, no assembly thing, no, the states didn't have rights to do that, and honestly, you can't necessarily sue the state on that, but you can run them through the court system. And the people can eventually work their way to the Supreme Court, which can tell the state, no, you cannot do that because it is in our founding documents, and it says, no, you cannot deny these people liberties, rights, freedom. Okay? Less so these days, liberty, but we'll get back to liberty in a bit. So generally speaking, a republic gives the states the right to make choices away from the masses. It's brilliant. Why should I have to live under the rule of New York? Why should I have to live under the rules of Minnesota? For that, why do I have to live under the rules of Texas? I'm in Florida. Florida is its own state with its own laws and allowed to govern its people within the confines of being under the thumb of a federated union of states. So you see, it's not a democracy. We live in a republic. Now don't get me wrong, they're selling us every day more and more and more on democracy. I think that just started back in the Roosevelt era. Once again, I'm no historian, I can't give you those stupid details. And God knows I wish I was as good as like Newt Gingrich and others who are just brilliant historians and can tell you facts and figures of dates and who said what and whatnot, because more would be my ability to convince you of my point. At the same time, I'm speaking to you figuring you lack absolute ignorance and have a basic understanding. And if not, maybe you'll, after listening to me, check into this a little bit more. So, democracy. Back to that. I abhor democracy. I've seen democracy at various levels. Now, I don't believe in a democracy in the family. Do the children, if they outnumber the parent, get to outrule the parent? No. Generally speaking, you don't see democracy in faith. Faith's based off of hierarchies. You don't see it in education. It's not the kids who decide what's going to be taught or learned through 2-year-olds. Democracy really doesn't exist in the American system because the American system is built on hierarchies. And you can't generally have a democracy in a hierarchical system. Generally speaking, our hierarchical system is also influenced 90%, maybe less, but 90% by merit. So that takes away from a democracy. And once again, lends itself to a republic. Okay? Leaders are picked according to their leadership. Now don't get me wrong, that still gets us idiots like, oh my God, the little alien girl with the nice bottom. Alex Stein was really calling her out on that bottom of hers. Alex Cortez? Yeah, Alex Cortez. Sorry, representative. As though she deserved any more respect than the schmo I meet on the street because she's elected by her neighborhood group of people. Whatever. She's still a chick who got a job that pays really good money where she can stand up there and bitch and whine and help govern our nation. Not a big fan of hers. I think she's one of the least intelligent chicks I've ever heard speak. She cannot defend any of her opinions, but she's nothing but opinion. And her opinions say that everybody has to follow her opinion. It's not defending her ideas and why they're good ideas and she thinks they should be followed. Well, this is right and this is wrong and you should do this. Yeah, one of those kind of people. And see, that's the brilliance of our government. You get a mix. You have good government from many states where people go up there and are able to articulate and rationalize their ideas and why they feel they're better for governance. Now, hopefully those people rise amongst their peers, Congress, and are able to help lead our country by leading Congress and whatnot. Once again, it's taken away from the people, isn't it? Or it's given by the people to the government. So, our republic, for which it stands, is the best way to go. But it diminishes the power of the people who have been in position for so many years and are not apt to relinquish it. And at that, feel so strong about their ideologies on both sides that they're not willing to relinquish it because they feel they can push their ideology into governance and governance into the people. Okay, because if we tell the people they have to be like this, then according to law it has to be like that. That's not generally how a democracy is supposed to work, but that is how a lot of our governance works because of, and this is kind of harsh, but because of the stupidity of masses. Okay? Because as a mass, we're stupid. We saw it with the ick that everybody got, the response to the ick. We've seen it through history. the Japanese in World War II, containment camps. We threw them in jail and basically ratted them out and basically turned on them, not unlike the German people on the Jews in the beginning days of Hitler's thing. Okay? Very undemocratic. You know what I mean? We were led by the government into that. And that's not really going through the processes. You know, I don't know at that time what Congress had done about legislation and laws, but generally speaking, it went against so much of what our nation was about. Because, honestly, they lived in areas that they congregated more one state, more another. I mean, honestly, there's always been more Chinese, Japanese, Asians of various sorts in earlier days, earlier times. They were amassed in California and New York. Both of them kind of had Chinatowns, okay? Generally speaking, it wasn't just Chinese, it was Asians of all sorts, and they were throwing them in these camps out in, I think it was Colorado. Once again, I'm not a historian. But how democratic was that? Right, where they had a stronger voice, it didn't matter. Because basically our instinct to overreact to a situation led us down dark roads. Okay? As a democracy will. Okay? I've always been against democracy since I realized what it was. It's 3 out of 5 deciding what 5 have without listening to the other 5. Alright? A representative thing says, well, okay, there's 5 of you, but all 5 have to agree according to a base standard of law or base standard of rules. That's a republic. Okay? Now, one of the damnedest things is a republic allows for more liberty. Okay? Yes, it's a government making laws to restrict the people from what they can and can't do at a state level. And to some degree at a federal level. No, it's not really supposed to be federal, blah, 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 I mentioned that. But from a state level. Okay? And the states are basically governed by the federal, so yeah, you see how it all backs up into one. But nonetheless, you have more liberty with democracy. Right? Democracy says, well, if these, good example, what are we dealing with here in this whole climate change thing in Florida that makes no sense for Florida? I think it's something that lends itself to a building code. I can't remember. But there's a number of things where basically Florida oh, here's one. Right now. This might be a little stretch. Alright, so we've decided all across the nation the drinking law is you're not allowed to buy alcohol till you're 21. Forever in our government, as far as I know, from the time of prohibition, it had been 18. Okay? Why 18? Generally, our government, our states, consider 18 to be an adult. Fully grown, mature of mind and body, enough to be responsible for yourself and in many cases for others. An adult. Okay? Florida, I think it was it had to be in the 80s, put up a fight against that. Okay, the federal government And courtesy of active groups like MAD, which is not a bad group, oversteps its bounds on a number of occasions, but is not a bad group. Groups like MAD push for the drinking age to be 21. And as often happens, the overreaction to drunk driving, okay, instead of just making much stricter punishments for drunk driving per state, the federal government kicked democracy into gear and said, well, we're not going to fund Florida's road system, highway system, as Florida had been accustomed to. In other words, government said, we're going to stop handing you money if you don't do this. And Florida went, oh crap, we need that money, we can't afford to do it ourselves, which honestly they probably could if they weren't spending money elsewhere. But anyhow, Florida went ahead and changed it. Now, that is the democratic process. It wasn't done through the legislative process. Okay? So, can Florida change its law back to 18? Darn skippy. Yep. Because we're a republic. Now, if the federal government, Congress, gets together, creates a law that requires all states to have a drinking age of 21, this in turn must go in front of the executive branch. The executive branch will either sign it into law or refuse to. Now I can go back through the system one more time, and basically if the president doesn't sign it into law, it can be overruled by Congress and made into law. Okay, that's a representative republic because it's the states doing the thing, not necessarily the people. Sure, I mean the people pick their representatives in that aspect, but it's the governance of the states deciding what will and won't be by having representatives from the states in Congress. Okay? And don't get me wrong, the president has veto power. He can say, I don't like this rule. Once again, he can be overruled. And at that, the Supreme Court can step in and say, you know what? This law is unconstitutional, and can make that law null and void. You saw that the affirmative action bill. And federal government was behind it. States were behind it. Matter of fact, California was the first state to lose its ability to practice affirmative action. So once again, that's not a democracy, is it? Because, I mean, California couldn't do affirmative action, but the rest of the states, it was permitted, supposedly by law, because the Supreme Court said it was. Okay? That's a little more democracy. Well, lucky for us, the judges we have these days went, no, you can't do that. It goes against the rules. You know, we don't care what the overall general consensus may seem to be at this time, according to the laws set by the founders. And even, I believe, 14th Amendment wasn't from the founders. Okay, that came in later. But by general overall consensus of the states, because to ratify an amendment, you've got to get 2/3 of the states on board. Right? To ratify the Constitution, I'm sorry, or an amendment. You have to get 2/3 of the state. I forget how much of Congress. So it's got to run through a process that, basically speaking, is not necessarily of, by, and for the people. So it's a republic. Okay. Now, the downside of the democracy that we're heading to, because we're heading to more and more of a democracy, Now, it's funny because during Trump's election, when they were going through the primary process for what Democratic candidate would go up against what Republican candidate, which are basically the same halves of one body, those two. So you had Bernie Sanders and a number of other people start talking about democratic socialism. Now, democracy had been used by those who had governed prior. I think the person who pushed it the most was probably, that I can recall, FDR. He really pushed it. And it was pushed since then. It kind of waxed and waned as we went through different presidents. But after everybody got the ick and the new normal was, we're a democracy. The republic thing you rarely ever hear, even though that's the truth. You rarely even hear it. All you hear is democracy, democracy, democracy. Because those who would rule us know that by creating a democracy, an anarchical system, which democracy is, winds up being mob rule and it's anarchy. But by gaining the power to do so, are pushing more and more of it. When the truth is, they're using democracy to kill the republic so they can have more of a socialist government. Okay? How are they doing that? And this is where I said earlier, I bring up liberty. By killing liberty. Alright? Good example. So, in my county, which is a pretty good county all in all, we are governed by the council. There is, under the council, or supposed to be under the council, and purview and control of, alright, is all the agencies of our community. Building, roads, things that communities themselves must take care of and maintain, including the policing and whatnot. And they all influence each other and whatnot. So, if we live in a democracy, you would say, okay, that if the people wanted something, it would happen. Well, recently, we decided that the boat docks will be a source for revenue. It wasn't the people who decided. No, it wasn't the people who decided. I don't think it went to a vote. It may have, but I don't see it working as a vote. Okay? I really don't see it passing as a vote. If it did, it's because people who don't go to the boat docks decided it was a good idea. But generally speaking, we decided the boat docks would be a chargeable service provided by the county. Now, not all boat docks are provided by the county. Not all boat docks will be recognized in a way to be charged. But what you see happening is people skipping the boat dock and just basically because of the way our water systems work around here, basically pulling off side of the road, dumping the boat up in the river and going to pull up somewhere else and park their boat, and then come back and park their car in a local park that's meant for leisure, such as laying out at the beach or fishing or whatever, and now they put their boat in the water without using the dock and paying the fee because the people didn't really want it. Okay? Another rule. Okay, here's a good one. Now, I believe if you asked most people in this county, should I be allowed to take out any tree in my yard, they would probably tell you yes. Now, I've done no polling, and I've not really quizzed people on this, But people are surprised when I recant to them the story of where a gentleman had gotten in trouble for removing trees in his yard because they were too small, or something of that nature. Particulars a little sketchy because it was a few years ago that I heard this. But the county somehow or another found out he removed these trees and decided they would fine him per tree. Thousands of dollars was the overall. Why? This is the man's property. It should be his liberty. Because after all, it's his property. It's his land. Those are his trees. That's his grass. That's his house. If he outright owns that land, and don't get me wrong, the yearly taxation does tend to take away from personal ownership. We won't go there, that's a whole other thing. But, generally speaking, he does not have that liberty. Well, democracy is decided through its influencing rules and ruling that he can't take those trees out. Now, I also live in an area where you can pretty much get away with a lot of... Hold on, I gotta correct the dog. Go. Sorry, it's hard to correct a deaf dog or call him back. They don't realize I meet the blue one over there could be their last. As much as she may have a fighter's heart, she ain't got it behind. Okay, so anyhow, democracy, if it was if we're going to go ahead and say, okay, well, you know, we all voted these people in, blah, 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 blah. It's a constant erosion of liberty. Okay, democracy is. Now, don't get me wrong. You can be given those liberties back. But it should be my liberty to cut down whatever tree I want in the yard. Okay? Not even a right, but the liberty to do so. Now, don't get me wrong, liberty must be tempered by law, a set of essentials that give us a, how can I put it, a basic guideline on how to conduct our businesses amongst ourselves and with others amongst the nation. And you need governance at various levels, almost all levels of commerce. You know what I mean? There's got to be checks and balances in our society, and I can appreciate that. But our forefathers fought for our liberties. You know, honestly, I don't really remember in the earlier parts of history that I've learned, as far as our nation, the fight for rights. It was a fight for liberty. Okay? Good example, you've got the great speech, you know, give me liberty or give me death. Okay, it's not give me rights, it's not give me freedom, it's give me liberty. And the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and it used to be pursuit of property, but they changed it in pursuit of happiness, and that's kind of a vagary that I wish I would have refined. But nonetheless, alright, liberty. But democracy must devour liberties, because we have to surrender our individual liberties to the masses. Now, the beauty of a republic is to maintain our liberties by basically standing up to the masses. A good example, our election system. We don't have a populist president. Not at all. And it was a wise thing to give the states the elective voice and not the people. People are swayed. I mean, dude, you see it with all the internet thing, okay? You see it with so much how people are easily swayed to fall into herd mentality, which, once again, is democracy. And in so, they will overwhelm those others who do not agree with them. A republic maintains the liberties of those who do not necessarily go in lockstep with the masses. Alright, now that lends itself to rights. Rights are the codifying of liberties into law. Now they'll say your freedoms. Well, liberty and freedom are different, but generally speaking, I go with liberty. You can say freedom if you like. But generally speaking, as we become more and more of a democracy, where it's mob rules, and it's not actually mob rules at the moment, it's really ruled by a small percentage of America. And I think you'll see that coming up in near elections. But generally speaking, liberty has to die for democracy to succeed. Now, I'm not necessarily against giving up certain liberties to maintain social order. Okay, like I don't have the liberty to drive my car at any speed I want. Matter of fact, I don't have the liberty to drive it on state and county roads. Now, if I live in a neighborhood with private roads, I can drive that car in there all day long. There's nothing they can do about it. And don't get me wrong, I'm still not permitted to drive drunk, because we have made that a law in our state that you're not allowed to drive while intoxicated. You do not have that liberty. But I do have, in that small area, the liberty to drive my vehicle. Generally speaking, could a cop come in and fool me into thinking I do not have that liberty? Quite possible. But when it's a private road, yeah, you could drive your own. You can drive go-karts on it. You can drive four-wheelers on it if it's private roads. If the county maintains those roads, the county gets to set the rule. Okay? So, you can see democracy takes away from the rule, or takes away from liberties. So, that's one of the tricks about our governance, in which you saw the Founding Fathers debate in the Federalist Papers and other various things, speeches given and whatnot, that a republic is what we would be and what we are, not a democracy. And honestly, I hope I made my point with that, because democracy is a terrible thing. It really is. The republic. It's why our Pledge of Allegiance is, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Think of those words. Think of that pledge. Okay? You're pledging yourself basically to the nation. For what reasons? Because it's a republic with liberty. And with those liberties, hopefully, justice for all. Okay? And a lot of times people say amen at the end of it because of the inclusion of God. Which, like that or not, it's in there. So, I hope I made my point about we're not a democracy. It's dangerous. It will stifle, stymie, and soon end liberty. We're a republic. Well, with that, to all of these fellow people who agree in our republic and cherish it as much as I do, because it's the greatest form of government we've ever seen in the world. Happy Independence Day. God bless you. Thank you for your time. As you know, it's the most precious thing to me. And the part that I gotta throw in at the end, because, well, you know, I kind of want to have other people hear these things, is if you like this rambling of mine, click like. Generally speaking, if you think somebody else may appreciate the things I'm saying, counterpoint, point, whichever, I do not mind, go ahead and share it with them. And generally speaking, I suggest hitting subscribe if you want to hear more of me rambling on about whatever. Okay? Next week I'm going to make a phone call, hopefully get that chair filled up. I have 1 or 2 candidates to call. I'm chewing on which one. I'll make that decision before the week's over. But generally speaking, thank you for your time, as always. And, well, really, happy Independence Day. Thank you and God bless. I'm out of here. Well, let's see if I